Welcome to Daily Scripture Reading. I do not own the rights to this music. Genesis chapter 38, the King James Version. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned in to a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he took her and went in unto her, and she conceived and bare a son. And he called his name And she conceived again and bare a son. And she called his name Onan. And she yet again conceived and bare a son, and called his name Shelah. And he was at Chezib when she bare him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. And Judah said unto Onan, Go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass, when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. Then said Judah to Tamar his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, Lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. And in process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted, and went up unto his sheep shearers to Timnath, he and his friend Hira, the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, Behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath to shear his sheep. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which is by the way to Timnath. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, because she had covered her face. And he turned unto her by the way, and said, Go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What wilt thou give me, that thou mayest come in unto me? And he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, Wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? And he said, What pledge shall I give thee? And she said, Thy signet, and thy bracelets, and thy staff that is in thine hand. And he gave it her, and came in unto her, and she conceived by him. And she arose and went away, and laid by her veil from her, and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend, the Adullamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, Where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? And they said, There was no harlot in this place. And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in this place. And Judah said, Let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after, that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth, and let her be burnt. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man whose these are, am I with child? And she said, Discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet and bracelets and staff? And Judah acknowledged them and said, She hath been more righteous than I, because that I have gave her not to Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. And it came to pass in the time of her travail, that behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This came out first. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. And she said, How hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah. The Amplified Version of Genesis chapter 38. Judah and Tamar. Now at the time Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a certain Adullamite named Hira. There Judah saw a daughter of Shua, a Canaanite, and he took her as his wife, and lived with her. So she conceived and gave birth to a son, and Judah named him Then she conceived again and gave birth to a son, and named him Onan. Again she conceived and gave birth to still another son, and named him Shelah. It was at Chezib that she gave birth to him. Now Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him in judgment. Then Judah told Onan, Go into your brother's widow, and perform your duty as a brother-in-law under the Levite marriage custom. Be her husband and raise children for the name of your brother. Onan knew that the child would not be his, but his dead brother's. So whenever he lay with his brother's widow, he spilled his seed on the ground to prevent conception, so that he would not give a child to his brother. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord. Therefore he killed him also in judgment. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow at your father's house until Shelah, my youngest son, is grown. But he was deceiving her, for he thought that if Shelah should marry her, he too might die like his brothers did. So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. But quite a while later, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. And when the time of mourning was ended, he went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah with his friend Hirah, the Adullamite. Tamar was told, Listen, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she removed her widow's clothes and covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself up in disguise, and sat in the gateway of Enam, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife, as Judah had promised. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a temple prostitute, for she had covered her face, as such women did. He turned to her by the road and said, Please come, let me lie with you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What will you give me, that you may lie with me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, Will you give me a pledge as a deposit? until you send it? He said, What pledge shall I give you? She said, Your seal and your cord, and the staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her, and was intimate with her, and she conceived by him. Then she got up and left, and removed her veil, and put on her widow's clothing. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, to get his pledge back from the woman, he was unable to find her. He asked the men of that place, Where is the temple prostitute who was by the roadside at Enam? They said, There was no prostitute here. So he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Also, the local men said, There was no prostitute around here. Then Judah said, Let her keep the things, pledge articles for herself. Otherwise, we will be a laughing stock, searching everywhere for her. After all, I sent this young goat, but you did not find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the role of a prostitute, and she is with child because of her immorality. So Judah said, Bring her out and let her be burned to death as punishment. While she was being brought out, she took the things Judah had given her and sent them along with the message to her father-in-law, saying, I am with child by the men to whom these articles belong. And she added, Please examine them carefully and see clearly to whom these things belong, the seal and the cord and staff. Judah recognized the articles and said, She has been more righteous in this matter than I, because I did not give her to my son Shelah, as I had promised. And Judah did not have intimate relations with her again. Now when the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one baby put out his hand, and the midwife took his hand and tied a scarlet thread on it, saying, This one was born first. But he pulled back his hand, and his brother was born first. And she said, What a breach you have made for yourself to be the firstborn. So he was named Perez, breach, break forth. Afterward, his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, was born, and was named Zerah, brightness. The end. God bless you, and thank you for joining me today.